Our first speaker this morning is Mike Smith. Mike is my boss. He's my friend. He's a mentor. I have been so privileged to work for Mike Smith, who's the president of HSLDA of the United States. He's also one of the founders of HSLDA, a homeschooling father. He and his wife, Elizabeth, homeschooled their children for many years. Mike has been a tireless advocate for freedom. He is an incredibly energetic and wonderful person. And I've been so privileged to, Mike, to work for you and to learn from you. And the homeschool community in the United States and the world has been blessed and benefited by your support, by your leadership. So please share with us, if you would, some of your experiences about getting started. What was it like in the early days? Because the early days of homeschooling in the United States is kind of like what most countries are facing today. The hostility, the challenges that you and Mike Ferris led the homeschooling community through with others, of course. But what was it like? What made you get started? And share with us your wisdom and the things that you've learned over the years. So Mike Smith, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mike. Very, very kind words. And of course, the raise, you will get it now. There's no doubt about that. So folks, glad
I still have 3 kids to put through college, so I appreciate it.
Glad to be with you today. We're in Virginia, and we're having an interesting thing happen to our building. Our roof wore out, and so if you hear some pounding, you may hear it. There are roofers up there just pounding away on trying to get our roof back up. So it's a privilege to be with you today. So just going way back, kind of how I got involved in homeschooling, and then of course what happened with the leadership role, is that I got into homeschooling by accident. Actually, I wasn't looking to homeschool until 1981. 1981, I'm a lawyer by profession. I was on my way to court, and I was listening to Dr. Dobson on Focus on the Family radio. And many of the leaders in the homeschool movement in the US and around the world actually heard these programs. There was a series of programs that were actually broadcast by Dr. Dobson. Dr. Dobson, of course, back in 1980s was one of the leaders in the Christian movement, family movement. And he got interested in homeschooling, and he met a couple by the name of Dorothy and Raymond Moore. And they'd written some books, some very interesting books about early childhood development. And that's how they actually got into homeschooling, by trying to figure out how kids learn best, when they should be learning. And a couple of books that influenced my family, my wife and I, were Better Late Than Early and School Can Wait. And Dr. Moore was on that program, and I was listening to Dobson, and Dr. Moore was talking about basically an issue that we were dealing with in our family with one of our children. They were not interested in learning. They were at an age of 5 where we thought they should be learning, should be reading, etc., and they weren't. And they were flunking preschool, which was really amazing. How you flunk preschool, I don't know, but they did. And so we were kind of dealing with that. My philosophy was better early than late, because when I went to grade school, we didn't have kindergarten. I didn't get a chance. Preschool, kindergarten, we didn't even know anything about that. So I thought, well, if I'd actually had kindergarten, I'd be a lot smarter. That was my thinking. So I wanted to make sure that my children got the benefits of that. But Dr. Moore and his wife, Dorothy, were saying just exactly the opposite. What they were saying is that children really, at 5 and 6, when many of our compulsory attendance ages in the States, here in the United States, are 6, 5, some of them even go down to 5, 6, 7. Basically what he said, that's too early for kids, especially young boys. And that's kind of what we were dealing with. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And he had the research. I mean, this man had studied this and done the research on it. And his position was that the optimum age for young boys would be about 8 or 9 when they start formal education. Informal, no problem. When they want to learn, work with them. But formal education, when they're forced to sit down and start doing schoolwork, reading, computing, cognitive work, etc. And what he identified, and we see it today, is that little boys tend to be behind the little girls. Now, the little girls, they're advancing quicker at that age. So what you have then in the school setting is you have the little boys trying to compete, and they're 2 years behind perhaps in terms of maturity. They're trying to compete. They can't compete. What do? They act out. What happens then? They get labeled. What happens then? They can be taking drugs. So we see this today. It's not anything new. As long as the education so-called experts out there, they're pushing for earlier and earlier. As a matter of fact, the United States of America, our president has put forth a bill, Mike, has it passed, that has actually early childhood education starting, being funded by the federal government at 3 years of age. That's in the works. So anyway, I listened to that program, and fortunately, I listened to the whole program because I was on I-10, a freeway in Los Angeles, trying to get to court, and we were stopped. As does happen there occasionally. And so I heard the whole program, and then toward the end of the program, Dr. Dobson introduced the term homeschooling, and I'd never heard it before. This is 1981. Never heard homeschooling. I didn't know anybody ever did that. But they laid a strong case for homeschooling, and in that few minutes, I became an advocate for it. I came home, I talked it over with my wife. She was willing to at least examine it, and within a week, we were at a homeschool conference in Northern California with Dr. Moore and his wife, Dorothy, and about 10 other families. That was a conference. That was a major conference back then. So we committed to do it. This was in California. I didn't bother at the time to check to see if it was legal. You would think a lawyer would kind of think about that. I didn't think about it. I just assumed, anything this good has to be legal. So it wasn't until I got a call from Debbie Clopton, my first client in homeschooling. She was in Lancaster, about 90 miles north of where we were in Santa Monica, California. And she had actually, interestingly enough, she came out from my home state. I was born and raised in Arkansas. Actually, I was born in Florida, but I was raised in the great state of Arkansas. And that's where she was from. But she had moved out to California. She had enrolled her 3 children in a public school. And her little girl, who was 5 or I think she was 6, first grade, she had been taught by her mom to pray over her food. So at lunch, she said a prayer. It wasn't an real out loud prayer, more of a silent prayer, but she bowed her head and prayed over her food. And the kids started pointing to her and said, "You can't do that," making fun of her. And sure enough, the proctor came over to the school, the teacher that was responsible for monitoring the school, the dining hall came over and said, "No, you can't do that." So her little daughter came home devastated. She was crying. Mommy, I can't pray over my food. What am I going to do? Well, Debbie was a fighter, and she went down to that school and she grabbed that principal, and the principal affirmed that she would not be able to pray in school. Well, that was incorrect. I mean, that was wrong. But Debbie wasn't going to wait around. So she pulled her kids out of school. Immediately, she got a letter from the district attorney threatening to prosecute her. They set up a hearing, and she called me. Now, how she found out about me, I'd done an interview shortly after we started homeschooling with the LA Times. And so people were beginning to find out that I was a lawyer, I was homeschooling, maybe some free legal representation. So with Debbie, I had to look up the law, and basically in California, they were taking a position, unless you're a certified teacher, you couldn't homeschool. So that was my first case. I made an argument, a constitutional argument. I had to bring all of her books into the district attorney's office. They wouldn't look at them. They weren't interested in that. They just wanted her kids in school. And we said, well, we're not going to be able to do that. So I guess you'll have to decide what you're going to do. They left her alone. So that was my first case that I won. A major victory. Didn't even have to go to court. And so with that, then I got involved in the leadership. There was an organization, CHI of California, that was just starting up, and they asked me to be on their board, and I got involved in that. And then I met a fellow by the name of Mike Ferris at a conference, homeschool conference. And Mike was a lawyer in Washington State. He was having the same problems there, trying to represent families one at a time. And so he came up with the idea of starting Homeschool Legal Defense Association. As a matter of fact, he already kind of had it mapped out, and he said, would you be willing to join me? And I said, absolutely. I mean, what a great idea. I wish I had thought of it myself, but at any rate. So we started out and started HSLDA in 1983. The purpose of the organization was pretty clear. We wanted to make homeschooling a fundamental right for every family that wanted to make that choice. And in the United States at that time, if you would have asked a whole series of attorney generals, the chief lawyer for the state, whether homeschooling was legal or not in their state, excuse me, probably 40 to 45 of them would have said no. Maybe under some form, but you have to be a certified teacher. You have to be under the thumb of the school district. Your curriculum has to be approved. You have to get prior approval, all those sorts of things. Well, the good news is today, if you were to poll 50 attorney generals, they would all say in their state homeschooling is legal. So been a tremendous movement, the homeschool movement in America. One of the questions that was asked me is, in starting an organization, looking back, what were some of the important decisions that were made? And I would say what you have to, if you're thinking about starting an organization, you have to think, what kind of organization do you want? So initially, you'd have to decide, do I want to be for-profit, profit, whatever your country has. But we did have some for-profit organizations, state organizations that were homeschool organizations run by families. And, you know, they did well. But generally speaking, because this is a cause-oriented organization, it would be for nonprofit, and that way you get the benefit of being taxed. You don't have, in the United States at least, you don't have to be taxed on the money that comes in, the revenue, and you get some benefits. The downside is you have to deal with the government, and the government is more intrusive every year. As a matter of fact, I tell people now, people in the homeschool community that don't necessarily want to start a national or state organization, but some kind of an organ, maybe a school or whatever, don't just automatically assume that you want to become a nonprofit, because I don't, going forward, quite frankly, I'm not sure that's the wisest thing to do. But at any rate, you have to decide that. What kind of organization are you going to have? And the reason the nonprofits are actually good is because you want a multiplicity of counsel. And if people think you're actually making money from the organization, they're less likely to probably volunteer and help out. So HSLDA was a nonprofit, tax-exempt organization, and that's how we started. The other issue, a main issue, is how you're going to fund that organization. We chose to do a membership funding, and still today, 73% of HSLDA's revenue that funds our organization comes from membership. Now, we have donations now. But here's another thought. If you can find someone in your country, some man, some organization, some woman that's really committed to it, or you can sell them on it, and they have some money, getting a major gift to start is really important, because what I've seen with organizations in the homeschool movement, many of them start out totally underfunded. I mean, they start out in faith. They assume it's all going to work out, but it doesn't all work out. You have to plan. How are you going to meet your expenses? I mean, are you going to work full-time, part-time? What are you going to do? See, in the United States, most of our state organizations, when they started out, were volunteer, all volunteer. Now, some of them got bigger and they were able to employ some people. But generally speaking, these were parents. And they had decided this was an important thing for us. So they organized together. You have to find other like-minded people. You can't do this by yourself. You have to find other like-minded people that are willing to invest the time in it. You have to decide, am I going to be full-time? How much time am I going to spend? How is it going to be financed? We use membership. But if you can actually find someone who's willing to give you a lot of money to start out, that's great. But what you have to think about, how you're going to continue to finance that all the way through. Now, the state organizations were able to use the conventions, and that's becoming problematic. And some of the state organizations are challenged now financially because that was their major revenue source, and the conventions are difficult now to get people to come out. That was a major decision for us. How are we going to finance the organization? We chose to do it membership. I think for a legal organization, you need members. I really do, because you want people that are like-minded, that are willing to invest with you. They're your partners. Basically, that's it. They're your partners. They believe in freedom. They believe in liberty. They want to advance that, and they're willing to do it through their membership. The other thing about membership, in terms of being your financial vehicle, is that members come up every year for renewal. And so if you automatically 60 or 70% will renew. And your donors, if you choose to do it through donors, you have to develop them. You have to continue to work with them, work on them, so to speak, because it's not automatic that they're going to even give you another dime, right? So you just have to decide, but I think it's a combination of the two is very good. That's what we do today. But find you have to be able to support yourself, because what you don't want to do is to start a legal organization and commit to these people and then not be able to follow through. That's devastating for folks. What else? Let's see. This is important. I think I mentioned it, but find like-minded people that you can work with. Without the state organizations, HSLDA would not have been successful. But with the state organizations working together, especially in the area of the legislatures, where basically in the United States, and probably where you are, that's where your homeschool law is eventually going to end up. I mean, we're lawyers. We defended our families in court. We won some, we lost some. You don't win them all. You're going against the government. It's difficult. But in the legislature, that's where we saw the success. And we have to have teamwork. You have to have, you're going to be, your office is going to be someplace, but maybe the legislature someplace else. And you have to have folks that you can network with, work with, and they're effective. Kevin Lundberg's going to come on in a minute. And so, like Colorado, for instance, Colorado has a good law, but they had to go through the legislature to get it. And the legislature was influenced by those homeschoolers in Colorado. And of course, a lot of our members helped out, but working in partnership. Homeschooling, legal defense is not just cannot be just your organization. You're going to have to network with a group of homeschool leaders around your country and work together to bring liberty and freedom. And there is so much dynamic in being able to get together and have this common purpose, this common cause. And as you continue through it, you'll have to be able to be willing to work for free, perhaps, or for a little for a while, till you figure it all out. And then just keep working at it as long as you have the passion for it.